by the studio to hang out for a couple of seconds. Ambassador Nikki Haley. Bucket list checked. I get to meet you.
Oh, it's nice to meet you. My bucket list is checked.
Now that's not true, but thanks for hanging out with us. We appreciate it. The new book is out. It's called With All Due Respect, Defending America with Grit and Grace. If you haven't followed Ambassador Haley's career, from accountant to governor of the state of South Carolina, through some really tough times and some great healing. We want to talk about that, all the way to obviously being the ambassador to the United Nations, which is somewhat like herding cats. And
that's an understatement.
Yeah, I want to get to that as well, but welcome. So you're on book tour. How's the book doing?
It's doing great. I mean, people have really been very supportive. It's been a lot of fun seeing the crowds and going out on tour and taking pictures and signing books. And, it's always nice to be appreciated. And I think that's the one thing, is you throw your heart and soul out into a book and you hope people can, just appreciate it. And we've felt the love, definitely.
Are you finding when you're doing this tour, I find this when we're doing some of our stuff, that I call them the normal people, the regular people, are all okay?
Yes.
And they're, even if they don't necessarily agree with your politics or your president or whatever, they still like your smile. They still want to sit down and hear your idea. They're okay to talk. It's these characters that have lost their minds.
I love being out with normal people.
Yeah.
I really do, because they're not so easily offended, and they're living for the day. They know exactly what matters and what doesn't. And a lot of the stuff just rolls off their back. So,
well, and you can have a discussion.
Absolutely.
Without somebody getting all torqued up.
A civil discussion. That's right.
You've spent a lot of time with people torqued up in the last few years.
Russia and China was definitely...
would qualify there.
Would definitely qualify.
Well, let's roll back for a second. You're the governor when the horrible shooting occurred in Charleston, and we're connected to a ton of churches there. Matter of fact, I'll be there Wednesday night doing an event at Seacoast Church there.
Oh, it's a great church.
Yeah, they're good friends of ours. And so we were really connected to that, I don't want to call it a tragedy, horrific act.
Right.
That results in a tragedy, just evil on parade, and in the form of racism, but also just in the form of mental illness, apparently. How do you lead through something like that as the governor? Because you created an ambiance of healing. You created a salve spiritually over people that could have gotten riled up and out of hand even further.
Oh, it was a scary time, not just for what had happened, but where we were going to go from there. And, this was 12 people doing what so many South Carolinians do every Wednesday night. They were going to Bible study. But on this night, someone else showed up. He didn't look like them. He didn't act like them. He didn't sound like them. They didn't throw him out. They didn't call the cops. Instead, they pulled up a chair and they prayed with him for an hour. And when they bowed their heads in that last prayer, he began to shoot. These were people like Ethel Lance, who had lost her daughter 2 years prior to breast cancer. And she had a broken heart, but she would go around Mother Emanuel Church cleaning, singing, "One day at a time, sweet Jesus. That's all I ask of you. Give me the strength to do every day what I have to do." Our youngest victim, Tywanza Sanders, had just finished college. And on that night, he stood in front of his 87-year-old great Aunt Susie and looked at the killer and said, "You don't have to do this. We mean no harm to you." Or it was people like Cynthia Hurd, whose life motto was simply to be kinder than necessary. That's who these people were. It was the first time there had been a shooting in a place of worship. The national media came in droves, and they just wanted to define the moment. They wanted it to be about racism. They wanted it to be about gun issues. They wanted it to be about whether we were for or against the death penalty. And I just wrapped my arms around the state because I so wanted to protect them. And told the media there will be a time and place where we can have these discussions, but not now. We had the funerals. We had to respect the families, and I attended every single family's funeral, open caskets, all of them, families falling over the bodies. It was just a terrible scene. And then within, I think, a day or two, um, the shooter came out with his manifesto, and there he was holding the Confederate flag, spewing all kinds of hate. You fast forward a couple more days, and it was the first time the killer appeared before the judge. And the families showed up, and the judge allowed them to speak. And one by one, unplanned, unprompted, they looked at the killer and they forgave him.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of forgiveness was so overwhelming that we didn't have riots. We had vigils. We didn't have protests. We had hugs. And we went through a few really rough weeks, but we held tight. We held strong. The Confederate flag came down, and South Carolina and the people of South Carolina showed what true strength and grace looks like in the eyes of the world, with just a horrific tragedy.
It was a defining moment.
It was.
Yeah. Of your time. Were you in 2 terms in South Carolina or 1?
Yes, 2. I served 6 years, so I was in my 2nd term when that happened.
Okay. All right. And in the middle of, is that when you took the UN ambassador, in the middle of it? No.
It happened in 2015.
Okay.
And
After.
Yeah, and I
Okay.
accepted December of 2016.
Okay. But you stepped out of a term to accept?
I did,
Okay.
yes.
All right. I didn't remember that part. I thought you'd
Yeah.
completed it. Okay.
Yeah.
So how long were you the UN ambassador?
I was there for 2 years.
Okay.
And
What did you think you were getting into, and what did you really get into?
It's so funny because I loved serving the state that raised me. I mean, it was just the best job. And right after the president, Reince Priebus, the president's chief of staff, called and said, the president wants to see you. And I said, for what? And he said, well, he wants to talk to you about possibly being Secretary of State. And I said, Reince, I can't be Secretary of State. I'm a governor. And he said, well, he wants to talk to you. You need to show up. So I show up the next morning, and I see the president. I had known him for a few years prior. And I said, look, I'm just not your person. I said, there's too much going on in the world. You need someone that doesn't have to have a learning curve, but I'll help you. I'll support you in any way that I can. Fast forward that Friday, Reince calls again and says, don't say anything, just listen. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. I said, Reince, I don't even know what the United Nations does. I just know everybody hates it. And he said, well, the president's going to call you on Monday. You need to have an answer. And, it wasn't the easiest time. Our son was 15. Our daughter had just started college. Michael and I, my husband, take care of my parents. They're in their 80s, and my mom has Parkinson's, so they live with us. So it wasn't necessarily the best time to move to New York. But the president called on Monday, and he said, all right, Nick, are you going to do this? And I said, well, there would need to be some conditions in place. And he said, okay, what are they? And I said, well, I've been a governor. I don't want to work for anyone else. I would want to work directly with you, so it has to be a cabinet position. He said, done. I said, well, I'm a policy girl, so I'd want to be in the room when decisions are made. So it would need to be, I'd want to be on the National Security Council. He said, done. And I said, well, I'm not going to be a wallflower or a talking head. I need to be able to say what I think.
He knew that.
And he said, that's exactly why I want you to do this. And he was true to his word from the first day to the last day.
So the UN ambassador is not always a cabinet position?
It's not always. It's dependent on the president. Typically, Ronald Reagan had it as a cabinet position. He was the last Republican president to have it as a cabinet position. And then and President Obama did have it as a cabinet position.
Very cool. All of this is covered, and many, many other things, in the book With All Due Respect, where all bestsellers are sold. You can find it. Ambassador Nikki Haley is our guest this segment and next, and Defending America with Grit and Grace. We were talking through the time in South Carolina when the shooting occurred and the healing process that she led her state through, and then President Trump calls, and she ends up being chooses to be a cabinet position form of UN ambassador. So I'm looking in from the outside, and I'm not in your world at all, and so I'm one of those people that just kind of looks at the UN and shakes my head in disgust. And it's not a political statement; it's just highly ineffective and a pile of money going down the tubes and all this kind of stuff. So I'm pretty cynical about it. So I'm curious, when you got there, what surprised you in a good way that you went, wow, this is so much better than I thought?
The people, the ambassadors, typically for other countries, that is a very senior position. So usually people at the end of their career, former national security advisors, former, you know, finance ministers would be, or Secretary of States would be a UN ambassador. It's the most trusted person by their president. And so it was good for me because I realized you could get a lot done because they could talk to their president immediately if we wanted to negotiate something or get something done. But just the caliber of people and the quality of people was really impressive. There was a lot not to like about the UN, but the people were really impressive.
Not what not to like, but what was frustrating.
The waste. I mean, the waste of money and the waste of time and the bureaucracy of all of it. I mean, that was the first thing that I went in. Being an accountant myself, I always go in and look at the numbers first because I think numbers tell a story and
They
you
always
can
do.
get a lot of solutions out of that. And so, we immediately looked at that. In the first year, we cut $1.3 billion off the budget. I mean, just with low hanging fruit. And there's so much more there. I mean, they still use elevator operators and everybody looks at the UN building and they think, oh, the ambassadors are in that big, tall, skinny building. No, that's all staff. There are thousands of people that work in the New York UN building and it's just staff. It's a big waste. It's very bureaucratic. Every country wants to have their own people working in the UN staff, and so it can be a bit of a mess. But we went in and we really cleaned up the peacekeeping missions. We fought for just streamlining a lot of reforms that we wanted to see at the UN, and we were able to make a dent.
Mm. What changed in you because you did that?
I think the main thing that changed in me are the things that I saw. You know, right now, especially, we were talking about how toxic the political environment is, and you hear both parties referring to the other side as evil. And I've seen evil. I've been to the Democratic Republic of Congo where they use rape as a weapon of war. I've been to South Sudan where I've talked to crying mothers where one told me that her baby was taken from her and thrown into a fire and she had to eat his flesh. I've been on the Simon Bolivar Bridge watching thousands of Venezuelans holding their babies in the hot sun for hours to go get the one meal they might get that day. The average Venezuelan adult has lost 24 pounds. I've had to look at pictures of children who died from chemical weapons from Assad. That's evil. What we have in our politics right now are different ideas, and they should be debated, and people should be passionate. But we need to remember to be grateful because on our worst day, we are blessed to be in America.
Yeah. If you don't love this country, that's the definition of someone that hasn't traveled.
I mean, go to any country. And what I found was all of the ambassadors, they might have resented us. I mean, every day I felt like I had to put on body armor and there was going to be a fight just to know which country we're going to fight that day. But while they resented us, they all wanted to be us. They all loved that we had the freedom of speech and freedom to worship and freedom of expression in any way that we wanted. And they would tell me that. They all loved the idea that we had opportunities in America like no other place. And so we have to remember that while we live in the best, most generous country in the world, it's not going to protect itself. We have to be responsible with it. We have to be responsible with how we spend with it. We have to be responsible with how we allow for those freedoms and opportunities. We have to be responsible with how we treat each other.
How do you think we lost our ability to have any touch of a civil conversation in the political landscape? And if we lost it that way, how do we get it back?
I think people were frustrated, and I think they were frustrated with their government. I came in through the Tea Party time, and people at that point were frustrated with governments not understanding the value of a dollar and the spending. That has since morphed into more of a frustration that government's not listening. And I think that that gave the rise to the passion, and then social media gave the rise to allow people to say hateful things without having to look the person in the eye. And so you add all that together and you've just created what's a really toxic environment. And every one of us has to be responsible. I know people talk about the president. It's not just the president, it's the Republican Party, it's the Democrat Party, it's athletes, it's entertainers. Everybody needs to be more conscious of what they say. And, our younger generation is watching us, and they are learning from every single thing we're doing. And at some point, we have to understand that when we fight and when we don't get along, and I talk about it a lot in the book, the only ones that win are Russia and China, because they love how divided we are. This is exactly what they want, is for us to be distracted.
Anything they can do to take our hand off the wheel.
That is exactly right.
Yeah. So what have you been up to since you left the UN?
Well, I have been talking to normal people and not Russia and China anymore, which I've loved. I spent a lot of time on the book. The reason why I wanted to write the book now was I knew the facts would be there. I wanted the emotion to be there. I wanted people to know what the behind the scenes was like at the UN and the decisions that were made, and being governor, and being a woman and family, and how you tackle all of that. I also started a policy group called Stand for America, and that's because my son and our daughter, they don't get their news from television or the newspaper. It's from social media. And so this is a platform where, we try and engage the younger people, and it talks about capitalism versus socialism, and why there's an anti-Israel bias at the UN, and what Medicare for all will mean. And so it just gives some things there. So I've been talking with some college groups as well, and just been enjoying taking a breath. It's been nice.
I was raised by a powerful lady, and I'm married to one, and I raised two more. Rachel Cruz is one of our daughters, is one of our best-selling authors that speaks regularly. And we talk about this kind of thing all the time. And you talk about in the book, and this is a fabulous phrase, as a woman, what does it mean to know the power of your voice?
It's not use it all the time, but it's knowing when to use it, and when you use it, make it mean something. And I think a lot of times it's not how much you say, it's what you say. And so I've always tried to tell everyone to use the power of their voice. You can move mountains with your voice if you use it for good.
Yeah. Sometimes when people find their voice, they have so much anger that they can't stop talking or saying the wrong thing at the wrong times. They're spewing. That's different than finding your voice.
That's exactly right. And look, I heard a lot of spewing at the United Nations, so I can tell you that that happens. But our words matter.
Well, we see it in the 24-hour news cycle. They ain't anything to say, and so they have to say something, and it doesn't come out well.
That's exactly right.
It's not well thought out, and when you've got an avatar instead of someone signing their name to their hate online, digital courage, which is actually cowardice, it goes there. So, Ambassador, thank you for taking time to come by. We're honored to have you in our home.
Oh, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Ambassador Nikki Haley, the book is With All Due Respect, Defending America with Grit and Grace. And having met her and spent a little time with her, I'm sure that's exactly what you'll find between the covers. This is the Dave Ramsey Show.